All right, kitchen staples, spices. This is one that I'm a little excited about because I love spices. I like spice blends. I like learning different regions of the world, what spices that are used in that cuisine and things like that. I got into a stint during lockdown of like using a pestle and mortar and grinding out my own curry pastes and stuff. So I love the world that opens up when you start getting into spices. That being said, I have basic ones that I keep in my kitchen for whatever recipe I may need them for. I have a couple of specialty ones that are only used for like very specific dishes or very specific cuisines. So I don't use them as much and they are not included in this list, but that's again personal preference for just what I usually make. So let's just get into it without any sort of order of operation. First up is pepper and salt. We'll start with pepper. I prefer having a pepper grinder. It's more fresh that way. You get more of the oils when you freshly crack it over whatever you're cooking or you're eating. And you keep those oils that pre-ground pepper does not have. It is already dried out, and that's the kind of stuff that's going to make you sneeze. So even if it's just a store grinder, it doesn't need to be anything very fancy. I would love a fancy one, but I make do with this one. To go with our pepper, we have salt. This is a little salt dish. You can kind of see right here. I've got two different kinds of salt. I've got my regular white salt, my table salt on one side, and then I've got pink Himalayan salt on the other side. I find that having a salt bowl by my dish allows me to just take a little pinch of salt here and there, which prevents me from over-salting anything unnecessarily. So I like having one of these little dishes right by me. All right, the next two, I don't actually use that often. I just think that it's important to have them on hand. Granulated onion powder and garlic powder. These are important if you do not have onions or garlic on hand. They are not a substitute for them, in my opinion, but they will be very important if you have forgotten any of them at the store and need the flavor in a pinch. The other thing that I use these two for is if I'm making my own taco seasoning. I pre-blend all of those spices together, just in a little dish labeled taco seasoning, but outside of that, I don't use it that much. Next up is actually something that I love using, and that is cumin. Cumin is a very earthy, very deep, rich, savory taste, but I think that it can be used so much more in just everyday things to just really add a bit of earthiness. In a lot of spice blends, you want something that's like savory and rich and earthy, and you will find that a lot of recipes call for cumin. Following cumin, we have another very strong, bold, earthy flavor, and that is a chili powder blend. Again, I use a lot of it, so this one is in bulk as well. It's not spicy, but it does have a little bit of heat flavor. You're gonna use this whenever you want a little bit of that sweet layer added to it, but still very like smoky and earthy, very grounded is how I think of it in my head. I use this very often in combination with cumin, so it's something that I always try and keep on hand, and something I would consider a kitchen staple. Next up, we have cinnamon. If you want to feel like you're eating something sweet without actually eating something sweet, cinnamon's probably a spice that is your go-to. It's such a familiar flavor, a familiar smell. It feels like the holidays, it feels like a cup of cider. It's just so comforting. It's a comforting spice. If you're a baker, you also are going to want to make sure to have quite a lot of cinnamon in your pantry, because a lot of baking dishes, especially sweets, will call for cinnamon. So it's one that I have on hand. Similar to cinnamon in the same family of flavors is cloves. So I actually have had trouble in the past few months finding whole cloves. Right now I have a little tin of ground clove. It's similar to cinnamon in that it's a earthy, sweet spice, but it also has this like pepperiness to it that I think cinnamon doesn't have, but also reminds me of the holidays. You'll find it in baking recipes as well. Not so much I have found in savory dishes, but that doesn't mean it doesn't belong in savory things. It just means that I haven't found a good one for it yet, but one that I keep on hand, albeit in a smaller tin. Next up, we have a small tin, because I barely use this, but I always keep it on hand. That is a little bit of ground nutmeg. Ground nutmeg does quite well in a pinch. If you need it for any baking or baked goods, it's very easy to include that. If you're using it for like a green bean casserole around Thanksgiving time, this is definitely one that you will want in your pantry alongside all these other wonderful spices. So small tin, don't use it as much, but still very important. Up next we have cayenne pepper. This is very, very, very good to have when you just want to add just a bit of heat. If something is supposed to be spicy but isn't spicy enough, it feels like powdered heat without being too offensive, but a little bit goes a long way. I use it often in my Mexican spice seasonings, in anything like that, but I also use it for soups. If I want to just heat my soup up a little bit with some flavorful spice, I go for my cayenne pepper. Another two that I use very frequently, paprika and smoked paprika. Paprika is a very sweet heat. It's also a beautiful, like, rich red color, so if you are making a soup or a chowder or something like that, adding a little bit of paprika will turn it into like a beautiful, like, rich, deep color, as well as providing another layer of like sweet heat. So as you're building spices and building these blends, paprika is one that I think definitely deserves its own little level. Smoked paprika is exactly the same, only it has that smoky quality. But that smokiness really, really is prevalent. It's very aromatic, both the smoked and the regular version. It's fun to just add a little dash of it here and there and see if it's something that really enhances a dish or if it just kind of like fades away into the background. So paprika, both regular and its smoked version, two things that I add in a lot of my blends, as well as a lot of my soups, surprisingly. Another spice I like to keep on hand are red pepper chili flakes. These are just great for a little topper. If you want something that kind of like is sprinkled on top, like a veggie saute or stir fry, and you just want a little color on top of it, red chili pepper flakes are really, really good. I like spicy things, what can I say? Okay, nearly there, I promise you. Now we've got some herbs. Some herbs. Rosemary, oregano, basil. Very prominent herbs in Italian cuisine, in Mediterranean cuisine. They're all very unique flavors. If there is something that really requires any of them, it's best to have them on hand. I primarily use them for sauces, for Italian pasta sauces and things like that. If I'm doing a Tuscan sauce, or if I'm doing just a regular bolognese, or anything like that, I love having them on hand. They're also very good for baking. If you have a more savory, earthy bread, rosemary leaves are very good to sprinkle. Another thing to note with herbs, I like having on hand the dried versions of them for most of my everyday stuff. If you really want to enhance anything that requires those herbs, getting them fresh or growing them fresh even is actually the best way to do it. It's just such a difference. Now we're getting into the ones that I don't use very often, but I still keep on hand. Allspice berries. These are these neat little berries, dried berries, but they have a very earthy, sweet flavor to them. What I like to do is if I'm making a batch of rice, I like to just toss a couple of them in because it permeates through the water as it boils and just leaves the rice with this nice lifted sweetness to it. It's also great for any mulled ciders or alcoholic beverages. I like just tossing a few in here and there when I'm boiling, things like that. Just adds a nice layer of flavor. And I could do a whole section on the spices that I have for like my Asian cuisines and recipes that I use, but to cut that very short, I have a curry powder, just a very generic curry powder blend, and then I have a 5-spice powder blend. These I primarily use when I'm making stir fries, sautés, anything that has a very unique Asian lilt to it. There are certain spices and sauces that I will always draw from, just to kind of add to that region, add to that flavor profile. Again, I don't use them as much as these other ones, but when I do make those dishes, I try and keep these on hand. And finally, this is one of the few blends or pre-made spices that I have, and I've always had this in my pantry since I was living on my own, and that is Old Bay. It is great on eggs, it is great on seafood, it is great on chicken, it's great on pretty much everything. If you're making fries and you want to add just a little Cajun flavor to it, you can just sprinkle a little bit of Old Bay on it. It's a guilty go-to pleasure of mine, so I always have a little tin of Old Bay with me wherever I go. Not wherever I go, that'd be strange. That wraps up the Kitchen Staples Spices video here. We've got the frozen goods and the dried and pantry goods coming up, so I'm gonna continue doing this series as often as I can. Now, I am going to be moving in the near future, so you may be seeing a whole brand new kitchen than you've seen in the background the past few videos, but don't be alarmed. It's all on purpose. But thanks for joining, and I hope you learned something. Hey, I'm Michael, and I made that.